Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to webinar The Quran in Europe by El Brandstock Platform on Sunday, 19 April 2026. First of all, let us pray and praise the Almighty God. Because of His blessing and mercy, we can come together without any obstacle here, with healthy condition and happy situation. Secondly, salawat and salam always be given to our Prophet Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. Thirdly, allow me to introduce myself. My name Sobibatur Rahmah, and I have the honor of serving as the Master of Ceremony tonight. I also would like to greet Excellency Professor Dr. Nasaruddin Umar MA as Great of Imam of Istiqlal Mas Jakarta, Honorable, the Academic Supervisor of El Brandstock, Professor Dr. Sahiron Syamsuddin MA, Dr. Abdul Muid Nawawi, Lin Ifah Nafatufina M.Hum, and Anas Roli Muhlisin SAG MA. Honorable Professor Dr. Lukman Estahir MAG, as a Rector of UIN Dato Karama Palu. Hello, good evening, Prof. Lukman. Respectable.
Alhamdulillah, thank you very much.
Hi. Okay, thank you. Respectable Dr. Haji Siddiq MAG, as Dean Faculty of Usuluddin and Adab, Dato Karama Islamic State University. Respectable Professor Roberto Tottoli, as Rector of the University of Naples Le Oriental. Good evening from Indonesia, Prof.
Good evening from Italy.
Okay. Thank you so much. We have you to enjoy the discussion today. Before we begin our webinar, let me announce the housekeeping rules via Zoom. First, please open your camera, then kindly mute your microphones unless invited to speak. Second, the Q&A session will be held after all presentations have been completed. If there are questions during the presentation, they can be submitted through the chat feature and will be read by the host during the Q&A session. Third, this webinar will be recorded for documentation purpose. Dear audiences, El Brandstock is a non-profit academic community dedicated to the critical and multidisciplinary development of Quranic and Islamic studies. It also to accommodate activists of Quran and Tafsir studies in the context of democratizing ideas and knowledge in the unitary state of the Republic Indonesia. The webinar brings together academias, researchers, scholars, and practitioners to discuss a Quranic studies under the title The Quran in Europe, Confessional Context, Translation Practice, and Knowledge Circulation. So, let's open our agenda today by reciting Basmalah. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Well, audiences, we step to the next agenda. It is my great honor to invite Professor Dr. Lukman Estahir MAG to deliver the welcoming speech. Time and screen are yours.
Thank you very much for the time in this forum, International Seminar on Quranic Studies from a European Perspective. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Distinguished speakers, especially to the Professor Roberto Tottoli, the Rector of the University of Naples, Le Oriental. Thank you very much for your presence in this international seminar at UIN Dato Karama Palu, and has graciously joined us, respected scholars, lecturer, and participants of this international seminar. Alhamdulillah, fi Rabbil Alamin. Tonight we are gathered in a significant and meaningful academic forum to discuss Quranic studies from a European perspective. A theme, according to me, that is not only academic in nature, but also deeply connected to the broader dimension of civilization. Distinguished guests, the Quran is a living text. It is not only read by Muslims as a sacred scripture that guides life, but it has also become an object of study for scholars across the world, including in Europe, where it approached through different intellectual tradition. Historically, the engagement of European scholars with the Quran didn't always emerge from a spirit of dialogue. In its earlier phase, it was largely shaped by classical Orientalism, in which the Quran was treated as an external object, analyzed through philological, historical, and source-critical approach that at times reduced its spiritual dimension. However, it is also important to acknowledge that this phase contribute to the development of systematic academic studies of the Quran in the Western world. Distinguished audience, in contemporary scholarship, we are witnessing a significant paradigm shift. Quranic studies in Europe are not longer confined to a framework or judgment, but are increasingly moving toward understanding. From viewing the Quran as a static text to recognizing it is a living text embedded within a living tradition. Scholars are now paying greater attention to the context of revelation, the socio-historical dynamic surrounding the text, and the relationship between the Quran and the communities that live by it. At this point, Quranic studies have entered a new space, a space of dialogue between East and West. The Western tradition brings critical methodologies and a well-established academic framework. The Muslim world brings a deep tradition of faith, interpretative heritage, and lived experience in which the Quran is not merely a text, but a source of living values. When this perspective meet on equal footing, what emerges is not an epistemological conflict, but a mutually enriching dialogue. A distinguished participant, in this context, it is crucial for us within the Muslim academic world to define our position carefully. We should not adopt a defensive stance as if the Quran must be shielded from scholarly inquiry. At the same time, we should not lose our intellectual confidence by uncritically accepting every external interpretation. What we need is an openness grounded in critical awareness and confidence rooted in the depth of our own tradition. For indeed, the Quran is not afraid to be read from multiple perspectives. What matters is ensuring that every interpretation preserves the depth of meaning and maintains epistemological fairness. The presence of the rector from Italy in this forum symbolizes that Quranic studies today are not longer confined to separate intellectual space, but have become part of a global conversation. This is a valuable opportunity to build intellectual bridge where difference in approach do not divide us, but instead enrich our perspective. Finally, I sincerely hope that this seminar will not only serve as a platform for exchanging ideas, but also as a space for collective reflection on how the Quran can continue to be read, understood, and presented as a source of value that remain relevant to the modern world. May this forum give rise to new insight that not only enrich academic discourse, but also contribute to the development of a more just, inclusive, and meaningful civilization. I hope with the recitation of Bismillahirrahmanirrahim, I hereby officially open this international seminar on Quranic studies from a European perspective. Thank you for the all audience, and wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Thank you, Prof. Lukman, for the welcoming speech. Ladies and gentlemen, we have come to the next agenda for our meeting, which is to hear the speech from our lecturers today, Professor Roberto Tottoli. Before we begin the session, allow me to introduce our host. Our webinar will be hosted by Hamdi Putra Ahmad, SAG MPhil, as Dean Faculty of Islamic Studies at the University of Nahdlatul Ulama, Yogyakarta. He completed his master's degree at the University of Oxford, United Kingdom, majoring in Islamic Studies and History under the prestigious LPDP scholarship from Indonesia government. His research focuses on Quranic studies with his thesis entitled Father-Son Relationship in the Quran and Intratextual and Intertextual Analysis. Also, he completed his undergraduate studies in Quranic Science and Tafsir at Sunan Kalijaga Islamic State University, with a thesis, Diachronic Approach in Tafsir, a study of Nikolai Sinai interpretation on Quran Surah An-Najm. He is active in academic and organizational roles, has won several competitions at national and international levels, has been invited as a speaker in various forums, and has published several scholarly works in the field of Quranic and Tafsir studies. Okay, for Hamdi Putra Ahmad, SAG MPhil, time and screen are yours.
Well, thank you very much for the MC. Good evening, everyone. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. It is my great pleasure to welcome you all in today's webinar titled The Quran in Europe, Conventional Context, Translation Practices, and Knowledge Circulation. My name is Hamdi Putra Ahmad, and I will be serving as your moderator for this session. It is truly an honor to guide this important and timely discussion, which brings together perspectives on how the Quran has been read, translated, and engaged within European intellectual and religious history. Now, it is my great honor to introduce our main speaker for today. We are truly privileged to have with us Professor Roberto Tottoli, a distinguished scholar of Quranic studies and Islamic intellectual history. He currently serves as the director of the University of Naples, Orientale in Italy, one of Europe's leading institutions in Oriental and Islamic studies. Good afternoon in Italy, Professor. How are you?
Fine,
Professor
thank
Tottoli?
you.
Yeah. How are you?
Fine,
Fine?
thank
Yeah.
you.
All right.
Thank you. Fine, thank you.
Okay. All right. Ladies and gentlemen, Professor Tottoli is widely recognized for his extensive research on the Quran, early Islamic traditions, and the reception of Islamic texts in European context. His work bridges classical Islamic scholarship with modern academic inquiry, particularly in understanding how the Quran has been interpreted, transmitted, and studied across cultures. He is also closely involved in the EUQU, the European Quran Project, a major research initiative that explores how the Quran has shaped European intellectual, cultural, and religious history over the centuries. In his work titled The Quran in Europe, a European Quran, a history of reading, translation, polemical confrontation, and scholarly appreciation, Professor Tottoli invites us to reconsider the presence of the Quran in Europe, not merely as a religious text of the other, but as an integral part of European intellectual history. As highlighted in the article, the engagement with the Quran in Europe dates back to the medieval period and has taken multiple forms, from polemical debates and missionary efforts to scholarly appreciation and linguistic study. What is particularly compelling is how the Quran functioned in diverse ways, such as an object of theological consultation, as a tool for understanding Islam, and even as a linguistic resource for learning Arabic and interpreting other sacred texts. This historical journey also reveals that European encounters with the Quran were never uniform, but shaped by shifting political, religious, and intellectual contexts. With this brief introduction, we are now ready to hear directly from Professor Tottoli. So, Professor, we are truly honored to have you with us today. So the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I would like to thank you all and all the people attending. It's a real pleasure for me to have a possibility, even if virtually, to reconnect with Indonesia. Very, I would say, a wonderful country. I mean, a big, wonderful country, and also a place where I have been in the last 3 years a couple of times as a rector, visiting some institution, mainly in Jakarta and Yogyakarta, Solo, and so on in Java Island. And then also, I would say, 1 year and a half ago, in Yogyakarta, in organizing one conference about this European project and on the topics I will be talking about. When I visited Indonesia, these 2 times, I giving also some lectures. I really found an exciting intellectual environment, a very nice place. Actually, something that I knew from some colleagues from North America in International Quranic Studies Association. I think about some friends of mine like Gabriel Reynolds, Emran El Badawi, and all the people who also had Johanna Pink from Germany, who had many contacts with Indonesian Islamic intellectual scene. So when I received your invitation, I was very happy to have this possibility to interact and also to talk about something about related to this big project that you can see here in this slide, the European Quran, about which also I talked in the article published that was just mentioned, and that I will talking about some of the themes of this project, but somehow underlining how this project that started in 2019 and ended just at the end of March this year to 2026. So a 7 years big project in Europe dedicated to the history of the Quran. And I will be talking about some of the main points, calling back and also revisiting, according to your suggestion, how the Quran in Europe was important in confessional context, interreligious relations, and in translation and the circulation of knowledge related to Islam and Arabic. I would like to start by mentioning that this project is was, as the article that was mentioned, covering a period from the Middle Ages to the beginning of contemporary times, the beginning of 19th century, because we left out actually a major part in the history of the spread of the Quran and the knowledge of the Quran in Europe and in the West, that is after the birth of Orientalism and Islamic studies in the 19th century and the 20th century, where there are many questions related to the interreligious relations, translation practices, and so on. But this is something more related to the development of Islamic studies in the West, the reflection about the Quran, according to the different seasons in European and Western thought, 19th century, colonial period, 20th century, the crisis in the humanities in the West prompted by the two world wars, and the general rediscussion after the Second World War of the old studies in Orientalism and so on. That was this contemporary period is very rich in translations of the Quran, in studies on the Quran. That is something that you, as Muslim scholars on the Quran, you know about the history of this intellectual path, ranging from early colonial and Western attitudes to a more uh, enlarged perspective of what Islam is and the Quran is inside Islamic civilization, prompted in the last decades of new studies and so on. As regards the Quran, I guess that today, at least in Western scholarship, and when I think about Western scholarship, scholarship produced in English in North American, European, Australian, Oceanian universities, where a lot of Muslim scholars contribute, because many departments all over Europe and America and Oceania, there is a strong contributions of scholars coming from Muslim countries, coming from Western countries, Muslims grown up there, and so on. So the scene in Oriental studies has changed dramatically. What I will be talking about, it is about the period before these contemporary times in which there are so many things related to the Quran translations. If you think about the monograph about Bruce Lawrence about the Quran in English, listing tens, hundreds of translations of the Quran in English, you understand that this is a big affair and is something completely different from the first steps of these European attitudes to the Quran. This European project was deemed 7 years ago, actually 8 years ago, when we started to think about this, to somehow change the historical paradigmatic view that European history was only shaped by Christianity and Judaism, but to convey the idea that even if as a somehow supporting actor, also the Quran and Islam played a role. Everybody knows from primary schools, secondary schools in Europe that the knowledge of philosophical Greek history, from scientific knowledge, came in Europe in Middle Ages from translations in Iberian Peninsula and in Spain, and from intellectual activity that originated in Muslim countries. But the role of the knowledge and the uses of the Quran has been largely under considered, and this project somehow wanted to state some important things in relation to the spread of the knowledge of the Quran and Islam in many steps of European history. In this presentation of mine, I will be somehow touch some of the main chapters in this to suggest your questions and inquiries, and also adding some new perspectives in lines for what you suggested in relation to the interconfessional context and knowledge circulation inside Europe in relation to the Quran and Islam. Let's start with somehow history cannot but start with the first Latin translations of the Quran, which took place in Iberian Peninsula in Muslim Spain in the 12th century. It was quite natural that the first approaches and notions about Islam and the Quran came from Spain and Iberian Peninsula, where half of the peninsula was under Muslim rule. There were moving borders, so it was a place where people could know Latin, Spanish vernaculars, Arabic, and being Muslims, Christians, and Jews, and where the possibility to have multi-confessional relations and multi-language interaction made possible activity of translation and somehow a real transport of knowledge from one language and civilization to another language and civilization. This figure on the left from a statue in one church is Peter the Venerable, the one who prompted the first translation of the Quran, but also the second translation of the Quran in Latin by Mark of Toledo. Toledo was one of the capital of the main towns in Iberian Peninsula in Spain, produced translations of the Quran. It is quite interesting to underline how in the general topic of knowledge of Islam and of the Quran in Europe, that the translation took place in the 12th century, while Islam and Muslims entered Iberian Peninsula in the 8th century. So one can ask why somehow a little bit so late there was an interest in this direction. From what we know from European literature in early Middle Ages, it appears that in the beginning of a confrontation in relation to Muslims by Europeans, the first interest by Christian Europeans was towards the figure of Muhammad rather than in relation to the Quran. We see from books describing these new conquerors coming from North Africa, conquering parts of Europe, in Iberian Peninsula, in southern Italy, in some other places from the south of the Mediterranean to the north of the Mediterranean Sea, that they mention in relation to this new unknown religion, the religion brought by Muslim Islam, they mostly refer to the founder of the religion, Muhammad, trying to understand his figure, his prophetic role, denying it, and polemically attacking it, but somehow giving much more attention to Muhammad rather than to the Quran. This somehow took place rather late in the 12th century because probably on one side, even if the early Christian Europeans knew that Islam was a religion based on a holy text, on a sacred text like the Quran, probably it was not so easy. First of all, to have people accessing the Arabic Quran, to translate it, and so on. And on the second point, for Christian Europeans, for many centuries, was rather difficult to have access to Quranic manuscripts and materials somehow to strengthen their knowledge of Arabic and Islamic tenets and beliefs. So, for many reasons, a specific interest in relation to the Quran took place from the 12th century in Iberian Peninsula. Why Peter the Venerable and Mark of Toledo decided uh, to prompt and to sponsor, really sponsor and to pay for a translation of the Quran they wanted somehow to convey the idea to the Christian Europe that to polemically interact and combat Muslims and Islamic faith, they were in need to know better the Quran, the contents of the Quran, and to prompt a better knowledge of the beliefs of Muslims. So Peter the Venerable prompted the translation of the Quran and of over texts that enter this so-called Corpus Cluniacense, a collection of Islamic texts in which there is also the Quran, translated by Robert of Ketton, an Englishman working in Toledo, mainly as a translator of scientific texts from Arabic to Latin, but who was very well paid by Peter the Venerable, abbot of Cluny, so a religious Christian abbot, to translate the Quran and over texts. This translation by Robert of Ketton, sponsored by Peter the Venerable, was very important and very influential because when it was later on printed by Bibliander in 5033, it remained for centuries the reference translation of the Quran in Latin all over Europe. We have more than 30 manuscripts, and then after that this translation was printed, it circulated widely until the 17th century all over Europe. So it was very important. One most important factor in this, it is the interconfessional environment in Iberian Peninsula, because in this work and in other works, along with the contribution in translation by Christian Europeans coming from all over Europe, like Robert of Ketton and other Europeans, Christian Europeans, we know that Jews contributed to the translations also of these texts. Jews in Iberian Peninsula were mostly Arabophone Jews speaking Arabic, but in their interaction with other Jewish communities, they knew also Spanish vernaculars and Latin, and we have many indications that they contributed a lot in this affair. In some scholarship, the Spanish time of the living together of Muslim, Christian, and Jewish communities are sometimes a question of debate if the interaction was always peaceful or not. So there are some tendency to idolize this period, and on the other side, different tendencies to somehow to counteract this idealization. We can say that in any case, it was a place where the living together by different communities, speaking a number of different languages, was the fuel of a possibility to translate, spreading knowledge, and to permit to Christian Europe to have the first access to Muslim texts, scientific, philosophical, but also religious texts, including the Quran. After Robert of Ketton, Mark of Toledo, you see here post stamp with Rodrigo Jimenez de Rada, the Archbishop of Toledo, sponsoring the translation. Mark of Toledo produced another translation of the Quran a couple of generations later, attesting somehow how there was a great interest in producing translation of the Quran in Latin for, first of all, using in polemical confrontation and to give Christian missionaries a tool not to interact with Muslims in an environment like Iberian Peninsula where religious communities were confronting each other. I would like to underline how in this same environment where the contribution of Christians, Muslims, and Jews in this translation operation was very important and effective, that it is quite interesting that from the beginning, the translation of the Quran was crossed by the usual debate among translators and in the final results of translation on how to translate a difficult text such as the Arabic Quran into Latin. Mark of Toledo produced a word by word, de verbo ad verbum in Latin, literal translation of the Quran, while Robert of Ketton had produced a rather different translation, reconnecting more to the meaning rather than to a literal translation. This is something that is not surprising to us because, as you know, as scholars of the Quran in a not Arabic speaking country, the debate about how to translate from one language to another, it is always the same about what language to privilege, the final language of a translation, so to give a translation according to meaning, or to try to reproduce the original text and so giving preference to the original language. This is a dynamic that we see since the beginning of the translation of the Quran in Europe. The path of the Quran inside European civilization is marked by some other chapters, and we'll be going very fastly through it because it's something that you can find easily also in the article about this long project that you mentioned at the beginning. There is the example of missionary orders, people, Dominicans, then Franciscans, Christian missionaries that went to Muslim countries. You see here on the left a nice manuscript of the Quran with marginal comments by Ricoldo da Montecroce, who was a Dominican friar from Florence that traveled and lived for 15 years in Baghdad, Iraq, and Muslim countries, where he learned very good Arabic, and then also he read, commented, and produced works on the Quran for Europe. In this slide above on the left, you see this Eastern Quran in Arabic and the notes by Ricoldo da Montecroce on the margin, attesting how even if the knowledge of the Quran was something somehow significant for a reduced number of people, translators, missionaries, religious, was something very important, first of all, for polemical religious attitudes in a time when the confrontation with the Muslim world was rather harsh and problematic. We have always to keep in mind during the review of these episodes that I will be talking about that we are not talking about European Christianity in a condition as in colonial times of so-called Orientalistic superiority, but a time when European Christianity was really afraid by the confrontation with the Muslim world, a confrontation that it was very harsh, dangerous until the last siege of Vienna by the Ottomans in the end of the 17th century. So you have always to think about how the polemical attitudes was really conceived to defend Christianity rather than to attack and somehow to conquest the Muslim world. This book by Ricoldo da Montecroce, Contra legem Saracenorum, that means against the law of Saracens, was very important. It was translated in many European languages. Just think about the fact that it was translated into German by Martin Luther in 1543. And it was for 3 centuries the major work in Europe in relation to the knowledge of the Quran and of Islam. There's so many European translations during the late Middle Ages and early modern age attest a text in the history of Europe, a large intellectual interest in knowing better Muslims and above all the contents of the Quran. This is something that went on at least until the 17th century. Let's move a step further and we move fastly to the 15th century. I touched upon 12th, 13th, 14th, and now 15th centuries. These are very centuries rather different one from the other according to European history. And in relation to the Quran, the middle of the 15th century, are text a step further in the consciousness of the need to know better the Quran and Islam. Juan of Segovia coming from Spain, not by chance, once again from Iberian Peninsula, in the middle of the 15th century, in momentous years, because he conceived and organized his work on the Quran during the years when Constantinople fell under Ottoman attacks, giving origin to the establishment of Istanbul and somehow attesting the loss of the Eastern Rome, something that was perceived in Christian Europe as a momentous time and also impacting on the faith of Christian Europe. What was the original question posed and asked by Juan de Segovia? Once again, Europe was in need to know better Muslims, to know better the Quran, and the previous Latin translations coming from Roberto of Ketton and Mark of Toledo was somehow faulty. And so he organized in a monastery in Savoy, in southern France, a group working on a new translation of the Quran, including an edition of the Arabic text, and a commentary and a transliteration in Latin script of the Quran. Something that was conceived as a final new product of scholarship on the text of Islam. It is quite interesting view of the confessional contacts that Juan de Segovia asked and paid the support of a Muslim scholar from Spain, Isa Gidelli, coming from Iberian Peninsula, coming from the same town of Juan, Segovia, and was a faqih of the local Muslim community that reached him for 4 months in this monastery in France and helped him in the translation of the Quran. Helped him also in the commentary of the Quran and produced a work that unfortunately is now lost. We have only the introduction of this commentary. But why is it important? Because in 50th century we have the first efforts coming from the humanistic and Renaissance visions that it is necessary to go back to the original text, to the Arabic, to the Quran, and to produce an edition of the text and a new translation. And this is something very important that brings us to Italian Renaissance, to the idea somehow coming from the intellectuals of Italian Renaissance, when scholars from the late 15th century and early 16th century formalized the idea that for humanists, as you see here in the last paragraph of the slide, formalizing that 5 were the main languages of culture for the humanists of the time: Greek, Latin, Hebrew, Syriac, and Arabic. This was somehow very important, and the mention of the so-called non-Western or so-called Oriental languages, that's quite clear, since Hebrew and Syriac, they mention Syriac, meaning also Aramaic. They mean the original languages of the Bible and of the Christian holy text, and Arabic was considered the language of the philosophical, scientific knowledge, and also including the Quran. Why the Quran also entered in the curricula of humanists of the time? Because for the knowledge of Arabic, in Renaissance Europe and mainly in Renaissance Italy, proficiency in understanding, in translating and knowing the Quran was considered the utmost demonstration of knowledge of Arabic. That means that intellectuals, Christian, Europeans, actually people belonging to the so-called Republic of Culture, of Letters at that time, if they wanted to demonstrate their knowledge of Arabic, for religious studies, for Semitic studies, also for studying the Bible, because for a long time Arabic was considered as a support for the knowledge of Hebrew. They had to manage the Quran and to be able to translate and to understand the Quran. So we find from the end of the 15th century until the beginning of 19th century and the origin of Oriental studies that the Quran enters in the curricular attitudes of scholars of Arabic and Islam as a necessary step to demonstrate their knowledge of Arabic. In the curriculum of scholars that sometimes used to teach Arabic, but not only Arabic, Hebrew, Syriac, and other languages. One example of this new attitude is, for instance, this incredible figure, Guglielmo Raimondo Moncada, also known with a pen name Flavius Mithridates, that left his hand in the end of the 15th century in many manuscripts relating to the Quran. The image here on the right that you have is one illuminated and very rich manuscript prompted by one famous prince in Italy, Federico of Montefeltro, that in accordance to a visit coming from the Ottoman Empire of a diplomatic delegation in his town in central Italy, sponsored and prompted a work on an illuminated manuscript, including astrological Arabic texts with translation into Latin on the same page as you see these. And along with these Arabic astrological texts, he also wanted that two chapters of the Quran were translated. The chapters, the surahs 21 and 22, you see here the beginning of one of them, with illumination and translation into Latin. You must consider that this was a very expensive operation. First of all, as you can see here from the Arabic calligraphy, it was a Muslim Arabic hand. This is not the calligraphy of a European scholar. So they had to hire a calligrapher, probably a captive or some Muslim Arab living held in Rome, probably at that time, a translator into Latin, that was Guglielmo Raimondo Moncada, a good calligrapher of the Latin, and someone illuminating, as you can see here, the manuscript. So here you have a very multifaceted example how a Christian Italian prince in Renaissance prompted the transcription of some parts of the Quran, its translation as a display of knowledge, interest, personal interest in knowledge, but also for diplomatic display in front of a delegation coming from Muslim country as the Ottoman different from the early polemical attitude and demonstrates how the capability to display knowledge and being able to manage the Quran started to play a new role in some parts of Europe from the 16th century onwards. One other example in this relation is the operation attempted by a famous cardinal and humanist, Egidio da Viterbo. Viterbo is a town close to Rome in central Italy, we are moving fast to the beginning of the 16th century. He paid a couple of Christian converts from Islam coming from Iberian Peninsula, from Muslim Spain, to produce a new translation of the Quran, also with the help of a very famous North African captive, Al-Hassan ibn Muhammad al-Wazan al-Fasi, known in Europe as Leo Africanus, a captive, a slave captured on a ship in the Mediterranean, brought to Rome. Actually, he was a nobleman with a lot of culture and contributing also to Oriental studies in 16th century Rome. And this was also an operation similar to Juan of Segovia to translate, to edit the Quran, and to produce a new interest in this text. Egidio da Viterbo is a very complex and interesting cardinal. He prompted a lot of arts production all over Italy, was also interesting in the knowledge of Kabbalah and esoteric knowledge, and the knowledge of the Quran entered in his cultural circle as something more related to the supposed interest in knowing the culture of all the peoples all over the world. This also is given is also related to what went on also in the Iberian Peninsula in the same time. I mentioned that Egidio of Viterbo relied upon the work of some Muslim converted to Christianity in the peninsula. In the same time, in the 16th century, while Italian and Southern European Renaissance time were prompting the idea to know better the Quran, Iberian Peninsula was facing a different situation where Muslims were expulsed by the Christians conquering Spain and Portugal, and new works were produced in a polemical vein to try to convert the Muslims still living inside the Iberian Peninsula. You have here a very fascinating page about this work, L'Umbre de Fe contra la secta mahometana, that is the light against Mohammedan sect, that is against Islam, where you can see here, written by this author, Joan Martin de Figuerola, a treatise including quotation of the Quran in Arabic, transcriptions in Latin, and translation into Spanish to use as a handbook in trying to spread the knowledge of Christianity in the Muslim minority still living in Spain, and so on. We have always to consider this double attitude: intellectual interest, starting mainly from the Renaissance and the humanistic period, but on the other side, it must be always considered that there was also a violent relation across the shores of the Mediterranean, where there was a competition on the field between Christian Europe and Muslim lands. So also the knowledge of the Quran and Islam was on this double binary, that is, on one side, intellectual appreciation, and on the other side, polemical attitude and use of this intellectual fascination, also in the polemical countering defense of Christianity against Islam. This is something where fascination and violent attitudes always live together. And this is quite clear from the fate of Islam in the Iberian Peninsula, where Muslims were finally expulsed at the end of the 16th century, and also by the relations that was fundamental for one thing: how all these people dealing with Islam and the Quran in Christian Europe could know something about Islam and Muslims. It was mainly through, on one side, informants, Muslim captives, and mainly on the second part, relying upon manuscripts and materials coming from Muslim countries. This means that for many centuries, the acquisition and the possibility to rely upon manuscripts in Arabic and in other Muslim languages was a fundamental part of the knowledge and also confessional interrelations between Christian Europe and Muslim realities, countries, and literary production. How these materials entered into Europe, into European libraries, into European ownings, and so on. Spain, absolutely, as we have seen from the beginning, was the early and most important channel from the moving border between Christianity and Muslim world inside the Iberian Peninsula in the 16th century. There was a possibility for many to acquire manuscripts and so on. Just one sample of this. In Vatican Library in Rome, you have a lot of manuscripts coming from the ownings of cardinals and bishops who were in Spain in 15th and 16th century and that could acquire Muslim manuscripts from Muslims there, and people also converted to Christianity or that moved away or from some other. Over channels of providing materials to permit better knowledge of the Quran in Europe were missionaries, travelers, also piracy in the Mediterranean world, and some famous episodes relating to raids and real looting activities and piracy inside the Mediterranean. The most important and famous in this regard are the sack of Tunis by the King of Spain, Charles V, and the capture of a ship of a Moroccan ruler, Moulay Zaidan, who was transporting around 4,000 manuscripts in 1612. This incredible and amazing collection of Islamic manuscripts was by Spain added to the collection in Escorial and was kept there until today, notwithstanding the fact that Moroccan rulers tried for generations and centuries to ask the Spanish back these manuscripts. When we enter in the 16th century, we enter a new situation for the history of Christian Europe. This is given by three very important factors. First of all, the discovery of a new world, Americas, that somehow moved away the focus of some European powers from the Mediterranean elsewhere, notwithstanding the centrality of the Mediterranean between Christian Europe in relation to the Ottomans. But by the way, the discovery of Americas and the birth of world trading connections changed a lot. Also, the perception of the Muslim world and giving new significance also to Muslim regions apart from the Arab countries and then moving eastward. Second point was the introduction of printing with movable type and the cultural revolution that this brought to European diffusion of culture that was very important from the middle of the 15th century onwards. And the third factor that you must consider in following this history was the Reformation and the birth of Protestant churches. The unity of Christianity, of European Christianity, split and was broken in the beginning of the 16th century, and this opened a period of conflictuality inside Europe and harsh competition between different churches and between Catholic Church and Protestant churches all over Europe, also giving origin to the religious wars in Europe, leaving millions of dead, and somehow pushing the knowledge of the Quran and of Islam, this is very important, in the use of European churches for their inner debates. But let us see, first of all, one of these 3 points, the introduction of printing. The introduction of printing impacted also upon the knowledge of the Quran in Europe because in Europe we have the first printing of the Quran with movable type. You see here one page. This was realized probably in Venice. Why Venice? Because while the invention or the introduction, the printing was born actually in China and India, and it was not absolutely invented by Europeans, but the introduction in Europe and the spread of this new tool for the diffusion of books was realized by Gutenberg in the middle of the 15th century in Germany. But after the spread of this technology all over Europe, Venice in Italy became very, very, very fast the main printing center all over Europe. This was until the end of the 16th century, and in the first half of the 16th century, absolutely Venice was the center of publication of printed books all over Europe. And it was a center where innovation, entrepreneurship, attempts to reach new markets for these new products was very important and active. And in that environment, someone, this typographer and printer Alessandro Paganini, probably thought, why not to try to produce a printing of the Quran in Arabic? This was realized in 1537-38. It was a Quran of which the only extant copy was rediscovered only in 1987, and until that date, a lot of scholars were in doubt about the fact that it ever existed or not. And this incredible copy attacks a copy of the Quran, which was very important, but that was a complete failure for the printer and typographer because it is a Quran with a lot of mistakes. If you see the page of the Quran, you can really say that one of the major unbearable defects of this Quran is that the vocalization is all in Fatha, that is in A. You see also here, no? Sawara instead of Surah, and so also some exchanges of letters and some mistakes. What was the origin of this printing of the Quran? From the last researches in our groups of research, I came to the conclusion that it was probably a production in small numbers commissioned by some trader in Venice or some powerful guy in Ottoman Empire as a gift to display to Ottomans the possibilities of this new technology. Producing printings, a few copies that were supposed to be further illuminated by hand, and to show how to show this as attestation of friendship by Venice, the Republic of Venice, in relation to the Ottomans. It was actually a period when Venice had a lot of trade and commercial interests in the Mediterranean. Ottomans were a growing power, and European powers were interacting a lot, trying to find possibility to come close and to be allied to the Ottoman power. So this was the reason in relation to this. This is also connected to the fact, very important to consider, and we go back to some of the topic we want to deal with, that is how religious texts were among the first ones to be considered with the introduction of the printing in movable type. So it comes not by chance that someone very early in the beginning of the 16th century decided to try to print the Quran in Arabic, because since the beginning, of printing in Europe, the first printed books were religious books. The first book printing by Gutenberg, the one inventing the printing with movable type in Mainz in Germany, actually was a Bible. You see here above the first image, it is one page from the first Gutenberg Bible published and produced in movable type, and also the beginning of printing was also was also characterized by the first great and high quality production of the publication of the Bible in Hebrew that were also realized in Italy, in Bologna, in 1482, and later on by some other printers. You see here one page of these on the right. What it is quite interesting in relation to the quality of this production and so on, you have to consider here one of the main questions that also affected the production of texts in Arabic all over Europe for at least 2 or 3 centuries. The production of printed books in Arabic in movable type was for a long time a technical problem because you can see here Latin and Hebrew with separated letters were by far more easier printable alphabets and characters. Arabic with connected letters had always been a rather problematic language to be printed, and also attracting the fascination of printers for a long time, and but being not so able to produce high quality products. You see here, no, the relation between this Arabic Quran with this Hebrew Bible, how the quality can be very different, and this will be always a problem in relation to the European attempts to print and to publish Quran, its translation, and so on, all over Europe. It is quite interesting that always in the realm of religious printings and so on, that the interest by Christian Europeans to the printing and the use of printing technology in side various European civilization in relation to the Bible was the growing attitudes to produce polyglot books, that is, books including not only the Hebrew Bible but also translation in other languages such as Hebrew, Greek, Latin. In some cases, not these ones mentioned here, in some cases also including sometimes Arabic. So further indication how in religious, in the so-called religious market in Europe at that time, the interest into the publication of holy texts was very much impacted by the introduction of printing with movable type. As regards the Quran, we have some rather interesting episodes that recalls how the Quran from the 16th century entered in many realms. Some of them are already mentioned to you, that is in diplomatic relations between countries all over the Mediterranean, and in relation to the knowledge of Arabic, in the knowledge of Semitic languages and Hebrew, and as a way to displaying the knowledge of these languages. This is a rather interesting episode to bring to your attention. You have here the first page of the first translation of the Quran in a European language. That is the translation of the Quran in Italian, made by Giovanni Battista Castrodardo, realized by the printer Arrivabene in Venice, once again. The year of publication is 1547, so 10 years after the Arabic Quran. Why this is a very interesting translation? I I recall a little bit to your attention. First of all, it is quite interesting the fact that even if it's written in this page in Italian, tradotto nuovamente dall'arabo in lingua italiana, that is newly translated from Arabic into Italian language. That's not true at all, because it's not a translation from the original Arabic Quran, but it's a translation from the Latin of Robert of Ketton. But apart from this translation was dedicated to the French consul in Istanbul, Raymond de Lutz de Aramon, that the same year, 1547, was leaving from Venice to Istanbul. Why it was dedicated to a French ambassador to the Ottoman court? Probably this was related to the fact that in the same year, France was allied to Ottoman Empire. The Ottoman fleet was in Bordeaux, in France, in an alliance and political interaction deemed against Habsburgs, against Spain and Austria. So probably this translation of the Quran and the dedication was somehow relevant in the inner European relations and the European countries' relation with the Ottoman Empire. We have here an incredible example how the displaying of interest in the Quran and in the translation of the Quran was used for the political interaction across the Mediterranean. Let's move now very fastly in the history from 16th, 17th century. It is a time when all over Europe, from southern Italian France and to northern European countries, the knowledge of Islam and the Quran is mainly strictly connected to the knowledge of Semitic languages and influenced by the general concept that the first chairs in Semitic languages are founded in European universities. People start to compete to display their knowledge of Arabic for diplomatic reasons, for cultural reasons, for religious reasons, and to display the knowledge of Arabic all over Europe was considered something important inside the personal curricula of the scholars. But to demonstrate proficiency in knowledge of Arabic, it was considered important to show capability to manage and to understand the Quran. So you see, all these scholars in 2nd century, in 16th and 17th century, all of them teaching on some chairs, kind of being important consultant people for powerful men all over Europe, that when they state that they know Arabic, always state that they worked on the Quran, they want to produce an edition of the Quran in Arabic, and also they want to produce a new translation. So still in this period, you have this very different attitude. On one side, the polemical attitude follows one line, and on the other side, it is used in polemical attitude in relation to the Muslims and the possibility to convert, but also in relation to the knowledge of Arabic and as a display of knowledge of Semitic languages. You see here on the left one page from the one who was considered the main and most important Orientalist of his time, Thomas van Erpenius, attesting the growing significance of Netherlands and Leiden in these studies. Erpenius left in his letters a lot of attestation saying that he was ready to produce a new translation of the Quran, but he died quite young, before 50 years old, and was impossible for him to produce such a major work on the Quran. In Southern Europe, very much important, mainly in Italy, in Catholic Rome. The interest in the study of Arabic, and mainly Arabic, but then also Islam and the Quran, is still related to missionary and polemical intents, but it also considered significant for the Catholic Church after the split with the Reformation and the birth of Protestant churches. It considered significant as also a way to connect to Eastern Christians, Maronites in Lebanon, all the Catholic and Orthodox churches between Iraq, Syria, and Palestine that were the object and goal of interest by Catholic Church in competition with the Protestant Church. This interest touched also other countries like England. You see here some of the names. You see the name of William Bedwell and Abraham Wheelock are the first Orientalists in the history of Great Britain. All of them attesting in their letters somehow the interest into the Quran. The dynamic is the one already that I mentioned, that is they started to sit on the first chairs in Semitic and Arabic studies to display their knowledge of Arabic. They stated in their letters and also in their attestation that they, for instance, owned a Quranic manuscript and that they had a translation of the Quran and they were able to translate the Quran. In Italy, Rome, as I mentioned, missionary reason, and so on. Figures like Filippo Guadagnoli that you see here, who started to produce the works dealing with the Quran that were also translated into Arabic and Persian and circulated in the Muslim world. What it is quite interesting in this division between Northern and Southern Europe, that this interest into Muslims and the Quran is also, as I already mentioned, affected by inner Christian polemics. Sometimes the Quran and the knowledge of the Quran and Islam is used in the competition between churches as a term of comparison and as a way to trying to demonstrate the truth of your own faith against the faith of the other Christian sect. Also, the other countries are affected by this interest in the Quran. France is a case very important. In the 17th century, France is emerging as a nation, a powerful nation, starting the first steps also in the attitude, bringing people from France all over the world in the Mediterranean and fueling and prompting the first diplomatic missions. It is in this environment that we have the first translation directly from Arabic in a vernacular European language. This was realized by André Dureyer, who produced it and worked on it in the middle of the 17th century. He was a traveler, a diplomat, and realized this first translation in a European vernacular. The Italian one, as I said, was made from Latin, not directly from Arabic, and but Dureyer made it directly from Arabic because after 20 years of diplomatic presence and mission in Istanbul was rather proficient in Arabic, Persian, and Turkish. This is a very important translation also because from this translation in French, the first translation in English was produced and published just 2 years after the appearance of the French translation. The English translation appeared in London in 1649. If we think about the prominence of the English translations today, I guess there is not one year in which today the English translation of the Quran is not appearing. I just mentioned the book by Bruce Lawrence about the Quran in English, where the tens and hundreds of translation are discussed, but this is an ongoing process. Actually, English was probably among the European languages the one who came last, and the first translation into English was even produced by from a French translation, from an Arabic translations. So this is quite interesting. It is also quite interesting the year because 1649 was the year of the civil war and inner crisis when the king was executed and Lord Cromwell of the Puritans took power. And this translation so appeared in momentous years and was also realized after a lot of polemics and attempts to forbid this translation of the Quran. We have mentioned many episodes of interest into translation of the Quran. We have always to consider that we are talking about an interest mostly connected to activity of intellectuals and scholars and not somehow reaching larger layers of population of knowledge, even if during the inner religious Christian rivalries we have a lot of interesting episodes of circulation of translations of the Quran among populace and people all around Europe. Germany was also a very important nation in this regard. In the 17th century, we have attestation of many attempts to work on the Quran. What characterized the activity of Germany is that a number of scholars tried to produce collection specimens of single surahs of the Quran. Actually, all the times inside the attention, general attention and interest into Semitic languages, so that the idea was somehow that once again, to publish a collection of chapters of the Quran was a way to display the knowledge in Semitic languages and Arabic. You see here many names. And why Germany emerges so strongly in the 17th century? Because Germanophone peoples speaking German were very much exposed on the borders with the Ottoman Empire in the Balkans. When from the middle of the 17th century, Ottoman Empire started to retire from this border, in Germany, a lot of manuscripts coming in Muslim languages, Arabic, Persian, and Turkish, were acquired, and they changed somehow the balance between the disponibility of these materials all over Europe and the growing acquisition in Germany of these tools to know better Islamic literature and also including the Quran. You have, but that somehow the knowledge of the Quran and Islam was so far connected to the knowledge and the interest onto other languages can be seen here in one case study, the activity of one of these scholars of Semitic languages on the Arabic, Matthias Frederick Beck, who published two chapters of the Quran, that is Surat al-Fatiha and another surah, the beginning of, as you see here, the beginning of Surah 30. But you can see here they transcribed the Arabic using the Hebrew characters. Why they use the Hebrew characters? Because during the 16th and 17th century, all these tens of scholars that you see here, some other names like Johann Georg Nissel, had all the time to face the fact that there were not such good types in Arabic all over Europe. As I mentioned before, the printing of Arabic was always problematic for technical reasons, and for technical reasons, there were not so uh, so many good types in typographies all over Europe. Further, 16th and 17th century saw in Europe a lot of terrible, bloody wars between countries, between Protestants and Catholics, and interrelation were always problematic. Further, you have always to consider that these same centuries had to face a real problem, that is the spread and diffusion of plagues all over Europe. We come now to the end of the 17th century, when the two most important printings of the Quran appeared in Europe. The one printed by Abraham Hinkelmann, you see above one of his personal manuscripts. This is a Quran commented by him, and there you have the first page of his printed Quran. He published the Quran in Arabic in 1694 in Hamburg, coming to an end a very long work on the Quran, and so realizing it the original project was actually to produce the edition of the Quran in Arabic and a Latin translation, but the operation failed and he published only the Arabic. It was only in Rome, in Italy again, that Ludovico Marracci, the most important closing this period of activity on the Quran, could realize a final edition of the Quran in Arabic. You see here the first chapter, Latin translation and a commentary. You see here in the middle his personal transcription of a commentary of the Quran by Ibn Abi Zamanin that he used as a first layer of a translation. Marracci closes the pre-contemporary period of activity, of interest of Europe on the Quran, and was used as a base by the famous translator of the Quran in English, George Sale. George Sale used Marracci's translations and sources to produce his translation. These are somehow chapter of European pre-contemporary attitudes on the Quran, finishes idly and practically with the last edition of the Quran in Europe in Arabic, before also the spread of printing activities in Muslim countries. It is this Arabic Quran edited and published by Gustav Flügel, the German Orientalist, in 1834, that you see here one page. And it is an attestation of the end of this long season and attitudes, introducing to the contemporary attitudes the birth of Oriental studies, the birth of the physical and colonial presence of European Christianity inside the Muslim countries, and so entering in a new completely situation. I briefly stop here before leaving space for your questions, just to mention something about this European Quran project. You see here some of the starting ideas and challenges. The point was the one really suggested by the introductory speech by Professor Lukman. Somehow, this project wanted to convey the idea that the Quran, even if it was not one of the main actors, was a supporting actor in the history of Europe. And we wanted somehow to demonstrate how the Quran had played a role in the construction of European cultural, religious, and political identities, showing that beyond the polemical first level and general attitude, there was much more relating to the knowledge of Arabic, knowledge of Semitic languages, inner Christian European polemics, and many questions. What can we say we discovered now that we ended this project? What is very most important, also related to the title of this conference, is the impact of confessionalization in European culture. Christians of various churches, Jews and Muslims, all contributed to translation practices and knowledge circulation, and also in relation to the Quran. This is quite interesting because proficiency in the knowledge of the Quran and language, that is Arabic, was not for long periods fully realized only by one confession, by one group of scholars, but sometimes you really had the collaborations of many people circulating all over Europe. What something that we discovered while carrying out this 7 years research was really the role of European Muslims. Muslims from Eastern Europe, Muslims from Iberian Peninsula, and also the role of Christian Arabs circulating inside Europe was fundamental in this, and attacks how somehow the field of European Christianity was not a solid confessional, totally Christianized place, but was a place of interaction of many people of different religions and different intellectual origin. In this history, and also collecting in a new database, we somehow underlined the significance of the circulation of Arab manuscripts and books circulating, the fascination in European history in the diffusion and production of Arabic books was a fundamental factor. This also went close to the diffusion of the interest in printing religious texts, printing of the Bibles, printing of books of other religions, the introduction also of the first translation of Indian religions and so on, and also publications in Arabic and in translation in various European languages and in Latin of the Quran was also an important factor in this. Very briefly, while I'm stopping here, you see here all the people involved in this project. This is something not so strictly related to what I talked about, but it is something that I have to mention in the end. I was only one among the four principal investigators in this big European project, and you can see here not only the mention of the article which I published actually on an Indonesian journal, making a general summary of this project. Some of the books just that already appeared on this topic. I can tell you that in the next 2 years, there are at least 10 other books appearing in this, and also pushing a little bit later the chronology. For instance, there will be a monograph about the Balkan and previous Yugoslavian, Bosnian, Kosovan translations of the Quran reaching the 20th century. So somehow we are enlarging this vision of the Quran in Europe, also touching interests inside the contemporary European communities. I stop here, somehow thanking you for your attention, and also mentioning that just one brief episode when we had in 2019 the last interview in front of European Commission, and we left the interview not being very optimistic about the possibility to have been financed, and we were asking ourselves when living in Brussels, the central place of the interview, telling each other, but okay, we prepared a project proposing at least 40 lines of research with PhD students and postdocs. And we asked ourselves, are we sure that this is a topic where we can have 40 solid lines of research from the historical point of view? Because, when you start a project, you have always some space that it is a challenge. When you make good research, you are not going to what you already know, because if it is so, it is not a real project of research. I can tell you after 7 years that not only we discovered many things and we are very proud of it, we also solicited a lot of political debate in Europe about this. But I can tell you that we can really state that not only 40 lines of research, but now we are aware that we could be able to cover 100 lines of research, but because from European history, European libraries, many things came out, and we discovered that actually the Quran, before contemporary times, before the diffusion of new translations, new interaction, before the birth of Islamic studies and Oriental studies tradition, the Quran actually was present in many chapters of European history, mainly as a political reference tool, but many times also as what Alistair Hamilton defined and named as a forbidden fruit inside European history. And with this, I finish here. I thank you for your attention, and I'm ready to have to receive your question. Thank you very much.
All right. So please give applause to our professor for his insightful presentation on his project. So thank you very much, Professor Tottoli, for that rich and thought-provoking presentation. It has given us a deeper understanding of how the Quran has circulated, being interpreted, and even instrumentalized within European intellectual traditions. What becomes especially clear is that the role of the Quran in shaping Europe's intellectual and even political landscape is far more complex than a simple narrative of religious polemics between Islam and Christianity or other religions. Rather, it reveals a layered and dynamic history that calls for further research and opens wider space for critical discussion and interdisciplinary dialogue. So now we will move to the discussion session. So I have asked the audience to either raise their hands or to drop some questions in the comment section. Okay, so there is someone who raised his hand, Pak Duha Lutfillah. Yeah. Yo, so please deliver your question directly to Professor Tottoli.
Thank you very much, Hamdi. Good evening, Tottoli, Professor Tottoli. Like we met a year and a half ago in Yogyakarta, if you remember me still.
Yes, sure.
It's very great to see you again, and thank you very much for the wonderful presentation. Like, it is always amazing, like, to hear that from you, and like since your project is like we also benefited from your books, so it is not surprising that we have a lot of new knowledge. We get a lot of new knowledge from you today. I have a question about interlinear translation because I am now doing research on interlinear translation under the project also under the ERC. It's about the interlinear translation, and my focus is interlinear translation of the Quran in Javanese into Javanese, my language in Indonesia. First of all, I don't see interlinear translation, but I am aware in your presentation, like until the last slide, probably like 7 or no 5 before the last slide. But I am also aware of your scholarship. Like you wrote something about, I don't remember the name, probably Hinkelman or something, who wrote the interlinear translation of the Quran for himself. And also in that slide, like before the end, like I saw that is an interlinear translation, but not in Latin. Probably it is in Arabic script. I don't know the language, but it's probably like by a Muslim. So my question is like, what is the role of interlinear translation in European sphere, probably, because I assume it is very different from the role of interlinear translation in the Muslim world. In many Islamic countries like Indonesia, like interlinear translation will be the first method to translate the Quran, and it is probably about the audience, it is probably about the target, the motive to learn the Quran, to learn Arabic from the Quran, the Arabic Quran, so on and so forth. So probably you can tell something about the role of interlinear translation in the European sphere and how is it so different from the Muslim world. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I always remember the good time we spent together in Yogyakarta, so it is a pleasure to hear your project. I'm going to share a little bit because I passed by the only slide where there is interlinear translation. You see, no, now, but you see here because the only slide that I passed by because it was taking too much time here. You have here on the image on the right the only interlinear translation. It is this Quran by Johann Zehendorf. That was why he produced his personal manuscript. That was you can see here on the slide. If you maybe it's very little, but if you go with I'm trying. You can see it now. This actually was one of the few interlinear translation by European scholars. Why you don't have interlinear translation? First of all, because people working on the Quran actually did not made their translations of the Quran and so on inside Quranic manuscripts or also transcribing Quranic manuscripts. My idea is that they always preferred to work on the Quran through the mediation of some Quranic commentary. You see many cases that scholars from Roberto of Ketton until Marraci, they worked on the Quran with mediation of the Quran commentary. My idea is that they were not so good in managing the Quranic manuscripts because these scholars usually had access to one Quran manuscripts, sometime in Ottomanic calligraphy, so they had to manage a scripture which was not very simple. And you can see it here, for instance, in the case of Zehendorf here. He made this Quran in 17th century Germany. Which was not published at all. He copied the Quran in Arabic by his hands and produced a Latin translation interlinear, but it was not another Quran, it was a Quran by his hand in interlinear translation. And it is the only case we have interlinear. So why there was not produced in interlinear translation? Because differently from Muslim country, the question of the Arabic and to give access to both Arabic and the translation was not an issue in Christian Europe because when they wanted to have both Arabic and a Latin and European translation, when you had both, were not so much interested in giving exact reference to the word in Arabic and the word in Latin and European language. On the other side, when they started to think about to produce these for realizing printing books, this was a rather problematic technology to have interlinear Arabic and Latin characters. And so you don't have in the manuscripts of people working on this actually interlinear translation. Erpenius made something like this with the Surah 12. You have seen the case of Zehendorf, but in all the other cases, also I think about a couple of manuscripts of other unpublished works. They usually give some lines of the Quran, and after that the translation, not an interlinear translation. That makes more sense for Muslim countries where, I mean, the original Quran is in Arabic, and the interlinear translation is something like aid in the comprehension of meaning, no? So that's the completely different situation. For European scholars, was not that way. On one side, there was an interest to display knowledge also of the Arabic and on the translation, but it was not always considered significant to have an idea to give an exact correspondence between the Arabic and the translation. First of all, because the access to the Arabic was problematic, so people translating preferably used commentaries of the Quran, where the Quran was written in scriptio plena and not in Uthmanic calligraphy. And also on the other side, it was not considered somehow something that could be very easily managed for typographical reasons. That it is very clear because from Erpenius until Marachi and Hinkelmann, you have in the letters of these people complaining that they could not find money and types to publish the Arabic along on in other pages with the Latin. So you can think about how complicated was probably to produce typographically and interlinear translations. So we don't have in their manuscripts when we have them, nor in printed books apart from a couple of pages these interlinear that in not speaking Muslim countries are very much related to the significance to give prominence to the Arabic Quran and then to display no the interpretation of meaning through the translation. European Christians, there was not such a necessity.
Do you have any response, Duha? Mas Duha?
Oh, if I may, thank you very much. It really explains a lot. But I'll have like a small like follow-up questions. What about the European Muslims? You have a book about that. And you also mentioned like Arabic speakers, Muslim ex existing in the European countries, also as an
Yeah.
informant, to write the translation of the Quran. So what about them? Did they write
You have
anything?
there the Tatars, and not so much Balkans, but Tatars translation, Polish, Belarusian, they produced interlinear translations with the same attitudes, being Muslims. So to give significance and prominence to the Arabic, and then to put interlinear translation in their languages. You have them from the 16th, 17th century, but that's a completely different situation because they are Muslims. I mean, I'm not giving prominence to not Muslims, so on, but the general idea of the project was to touch the significance of the Qurans for not Muslim Europeans and Christian Europeans. Even if I must say, when we had the interview in front of a commission, they told us you are not considered Eastern Europeans and so on. And actually, we also financed a couple of postdocs working on Eastern Europe where many very interesting things came out. So with interaction of Muslim communities, not Muslim communities, Tatars, Slavs, and so on. There actually you have also, we gave hospitality to a couple of conferences exactly in Naples with people coming from Poland, Belarus, Czechia, and so on, with some very nice editions of interlinear translation of the Quran with commentary. But that's really something that gives an exact indication that this is a question mostly related to Muslim communities where the prominence, significance given to the original Quran in Arabic has a different meaning than to the European scholars working on the Quran. Actually, I don't know why Zechendorf, all alone in his Germany small town, decided to produce an interlinear something like this. Probably because it was by far more practical to him. to have a first layer of a translation while transcribing by his hand the Quran. This is a very quite interesting topic to prompt further research. Some of us actually, not myself, but some are working on this.
Thank you very much.
So most of the you have in European libraries, you have a very few Quranic manuscripts with signs by European hands and so on. But as you saw, also Ricordo da Monte Croce, most of them preferred to leave comment and translation on margin of the Quran, of the comment of the manuscripts. I cannot say that it is a form of respect because sometimes the manuscripts that could manage were not very large volumes with space, so no very small ones. These guys could really find only one, maybe small manuscript, so it was not easy. But it is clear also from the collection of Hinkelmann where he had, I could a few years ago to visit his collection of manuscripts. We are in the end of the 17th century. He was the only one working on the Quran with a lot of manuscripts coming from the retirement of Ottomans from the Balkans. He has 12 manuscripts of the Quran, a quite amazing collection for the time. Probably he got a hand very late before dying, so he had not a disposition 20 years while before his death, so it was in the end, and two commentaries, and he left most of his comments on the two Quranic commentaries, not on the Quran manuscripts. I cannot say there is a form of respect, but somehow they consider not so much useful to work on translation directly on the Quran manuscripts the scholars had at disposition. Sometimes they're very small manuscripts. Sometimes I guess they had problem with the calligraphy of these Qurans. For instance, Zehendorf, you can really see that he did not understand the small signs on the pausal systems, no? The small letters. He tried to imitate these small letters, but was not aware of the meaning of them. So it is by far clear that they all preferred to start translation on commentaries on the Quran and not on the Quran. So they did not add, if not in a few cases, interlinear translations on the Quran manuscripts.
All right, thank you. I think we could move to another question from the comment section. There are some questions here, but I would prefer to choose the earliest ones, and for each person, only one question. So, Professor, in your presentation, this is from Muhammad Reza Fadil. He asked, in your presentation, you mentioned that the Quran played a role in inter-Christian polemics, specifically the debate between Catholics and Protestants. Could you give an example of what role you are referring to, or describe what happened at that time?
Very briefly, because the topic is rather complex. When there is the split in Christianity, you really see that in the inner strong polemical attitudes and debates, there is a two-way attitude. That is, Protestants and Catholics used to compare the adversary to Muslims, saying, you believe something that is close to Islam, so you are wrong. I make an example. For instance, in the 17th century, Hottinger and other very important European Protestant Orientalists will say Islam as the Sufi Turuk, the Sufi orders, like Catholic have religious orders. So you are similar, you are wrong because you are similar to Islam. On the other side, sometimes knowledge of the Quran and of Islam is used as a positive term. In 17th century, there will be a debate inside Semitic studies in Europe about the origin of the vocalization of the Hebrew Bible. The sign of vocalization. Do the sign of vocalization belong to the original revelation or not? Some scholars will make reference to some manuscripts of the Quran kept in European libraries to bring to attention that all the Quran manuscripts are vocalized, saying that in such a strong textual religion like Islam, the holy text is vocalized since the first attestation, so also the Bible is vocalized since its origin. You have other example where, for instance, you have indication of the influence of the Quran in the inner Protestant churches' rivalries. For instance, you have a small sect of Christians, the so-called Socinians, anti-Trinitarian Christians, that were accused by over Protestant churches and Catholics to have been influenced by the knowledge of the Quran and by Quranic tenets against the Trinity, so in defense of the monotheism. Actually, one famous martyr burnt on stake in Geneva, Michael Servetus, it is known that he had a translation of the Quran in the Latin version of Robert of Ketton, and that probably was also influenced by the contents of the Quran. The famous Italian historian Carlo Ginzburg published a famous monograph, The Worms and the Cheese, about a supposed heretic from northern Italy, which was condemned as an heretic by Catholic Church, prompting some beliefs that actually were probably influenced by his knowledge and reading of the Quran in the Italian translation by Castrodardo. So you have many episodes when somehow the Quran and Islam was circulating in a situation where in the competition inside Christian churches, Islam and the Quran were sometimes used as a term of comparison, mainly for polemical things, to say you enemy are similar to Islam, so you are wrong, but sometimes also using Christian tenets, Muslim tenets, to say that since it is attested in an old text as the Quran, probably something similar in Christian and Jewish tradition is ancient as in the Muslim Quran and so on. The episodes could be very numerous. You have many attestation in this. The polemical attitude is the main one, but along with that, you have many other things. When later on, actually, in the second half of the 17th century in Germany, in the 18th century in Germany, for instance, where will be a debate about poeticity and poetry in religious texts and in the Bible, some scholars will bring as a term of comparison some surahs of the Quran as attestation that holy texts can also include some para-poetical passages and not only normative, legal and narrative parts. So you have many episodes in this regard. And I finish mentioning, recalling to your attention that Martin Luther, who translated Ricordo da Monte Croce contra legge Saracenorum, also wrote an introduction to the publication of the Latin by Robert of Ketton in Basel in 1543. He wrote an introduction because he considered the publication of the Quran in Latin very useful for the Protestant churches.
All right. Thank you for your answer. And actually, we have several other questions. Would you mind to me to read all the questions, or just we pick up or one or two to
Let's try a few ones. I will try to answer very briefly.
All right, all right. The another one comes from Ahmad Fauzi. He asks, I have a question. We know that a number of Christians were engaged and improved into the translation. But on the other hand, the Quran translation project somehow threatened the religious authority of the majority at 11th or 12th century. The question is, what was the internal context of Christianity in Europe at that time, and which Christian sects felt threatened and which ones gave hands to the translation project? Could you grasp the question?
Very briefly, before the reform of the
Okay.
beginning of the 16th century, the significance of early translation are really connected to inner dynamics inside not sects of Christianity, but inside the Christian church. That means that 12th century, a first interest for polemical reason to translate the Quran. 13th century, the emergence of religious orders and missionaries. You have, we had no time to go through it, but a number of councils, periodical council of the church, where some bishops started to say, we need to know better Islam and the Quran. And this is the environment prompting the translation of the Quran. When we come to the 15th century, religious cardinals and figures are involved in operations about the translation, but somehow the religious tension is goes along with the humanistic and Renaissance interest in knowing the language, Arabic, and so on. The use by different Christian sects relates to what I already said many times in the rivalries between Protestant churches and between Protestant churches and Catholic Church, using Quran and Islam in the way I already mentioned, to make parallels between the over Christian side and Islam, or to make reference to some points to underline their ancient beliefs at all. For instance, from the Catholic point of view, the mention of the role of Mariam in the Quran is one important thing, because Protestants believe differently about the mother of Jesus. So this was also a very important thing in inner polemics, also recalling the ancient time of the Quran as a reflection of the original belief on Christian side. So you have inside some Christian churches also believe that the Quran is the holy text of the enemies of the Muslims, but that it also contains some truth. So the challenge is to discover these truths, but the different sects, churches, Protestant, and so on, think absolutely differently about it. But before the Protestant Reformation, you cannot talk about interest by some particular sects, Christian sects, in relation to the translation activity. It's something coming from the evolution of the unity of the church in Christianity, and a growing attention to Islam, prompted by different things: knowledge, missionary, polemical, and then humanistic interest.
All right, thank you. The next one comes from Alif Jabal Kurdi. He says, we got fascinating data when the first printed book was the scripture or Bible. So it will allow us to inquire the role or position of religion in the realm of advancement in technology in Europe, especially the discovery of new media in publishing, and what exactly the relationship of the two.
You know, the explosion of the diffusion of printing with movable type actually took place outside the religious institution. It was really a question of entrepreneurship, and these private entrepreneurs from Germany, and then after that in Venice, they thought that along with not religious literature, print to print religious books was probably a good economical affair. So Gutenberg chose to publish the first book was the Bible because he thought that a very expensive first production had to deal with a book of possible no good market inside Europe. So I would suggest that this is not so much the origin of printing with movable type, a question of religious attitudes, but rather the use of religious books by entrepreneurs at the exciting beginning of printing activities. Because you see in Venice, when you have a list of the major publishers, they published books of law for school, first universities, the major authors of literature, and something related to Christianity and then Catholic Church. So books that could have a good market. Church, at least in Catholic lands and also Protestant churches, took a hand and controlled the market of books only later on from the end of the 16th century and the 17th. Before that, actually, was not something prompted by religious churches in Europe, but the religious texts were used by private entrepreneurs to sell more books.
Okay, thank you. And this is the last question from Muhammad Ihsan. It's a bit sensitive, but he may ask for your personal opinion. He asked, why did some cases of the burning of the Quran occur in European country? Does the actor express his anger by burning the Quran? Maybe this is also my question. Did this also happen in the last in the past? I mean, this case is maybe something that occurs in the contemporary era. But how about the history of this? Do you know?
And rather than mentioning these episodes, rather sad episodes, I would mention that also our project was actually exactly 1 year ago, in April of the last year, was under political attack by starting from France and also reaching European Parliament by some, I would say, anti-Islamic right-wing parties all over Europe attacking a project that was trying to demonstrate an historical role by Muslims and Quran in Europe. Because Europe, you have some political parts against this attitude, and also living with a lot of somehow unrest, the presence of Muslim minorities in Europe. Now in European countries, about 30, more than 30 million of Muslims live, coming from recent immigrations, and this is a very sensitive point inside the political debates in Europe. So you have a majority still somehow prompting the growing of a new situation in all Europe, that is a multi-religious and multicultural Europe that was not absolutely the same, because Europe has also a very dark and black history of liquidation of religious minorities. And this new situation is really prompting a new idea of Europe in which there is a lot of problems, because new situation always suggests also oppositions of every kind. I think about towns in Italy, until the Second World War were absolutely 90.9% of Catholics. Now you have in many places 150 nationalities, not only Muslims, Orthodox Christians, Christians coming from evangelical churches of South America, and the religious market is completely different. And reaction of some minorities is really denying the new situation and also considering with danger, with a dangerous attitude, the presence of Muslims, with attitudes like this. This is an ongoing debate. And I must say, I'm very proud that also our project was attacked because something that is always related to the title of the project. During these 7 years, I visited a lot of Muslim countries from Indonesia, Nigeria, Morocco, Tunisia, and so on. And the first question coming from all these environments, most of them not so intellectually sophisticated like Indonesia, where the intellectual scene is very important, vivid, and perfectly aware of all the studies all over the world about the Quran. But everybody, I remember in Nigeria and also Cairo, asking why you gave the title European Quran. I mean, the Quran is one. There is no European, no Indonesian, no Moroccan Quran. And the answer has always been we discussed about if to title it European Quran or the Quran in Europe, but I wanted, and also some of us wanted, to call it European Quran because it was by far more challenging for Europe, no? The idea to talk about a European Quran. And actually, this was solicited polemics inside Europe and attacks for some anti-Islamic attitude. The burning of the Quran belongs to this part of this recent history, reflecting somehow an unpleasant and not good absolutely answers to this new situation of presence of Muslims inside Europe now as a significant minorities all over European countries. And this project, as many other projects on the Quran and Muslims financed by the European Commission, go in one direction, but you have also political reactions on the other side.
Okay, thank you. There is someone raising hand. Rashad, would you? Oh, maybe this is the last question, I
Yes.
think, because we've passed 2 hours and 30 minutes. Yes, please.
Okay, thank you, Mas Andi, and thank you for the Professor Tottoli. It's fascinating about how the European uh, get the change from the past. They such about in terms of with the
Sorry,
Muslims about
Mas Rashad, your voice is not clear. Could you please
oh yeah.
fix it
Check
first?
check. Can you hear me? Hello?
Okay, go ahead.
Okay. I'm just curious about the process of the translating in 17th century. Especially maybe I do not find from the presentation the name of Ludovico Marathi. So he's one of the translator of the Quran when he translated the Quran into Latin, and it mentioned as the authoritative translation at the time. But I just curious about how he kept the full process. Is he accompanied by Muslim scholars at the time, or in some way maybe? And in some literatures, I heard about this translation is related to refutations of the Muslim doctrines. Is it true or not? Or maybe this because of the process of the translation at the time is one of the project from the church in conflict with the Muslim, or maybe not. And my second question about I think because of you have mentioned all the projects of the European Quran or the project of the manuscript and many so on. Uh, is we have the opportunity to get a research in the maybe the University of Naples in terms of the scholarship, maybe in the master or the a PhD for the people or scholar from Indonesia, or maybe we have some like collaboration research or in some way. Thank you.
Thank you very briefly. Thank you for your question. Yes, the translation of Marachi, the final product that was printed in 1698, if I understood well the question, is I mean includes the Arabic text, the translation into Latin, and notes of confutation of the Quran. It has a very strong polemical attitude against Muslims, but on the other side, we discovered these personal manuscripts where he translated 4 times the Quran. So the general impression is that, I mean, he was a Catholic bishop, believing, in the centrality of Christian faith, but he also dedicated 40 years of his life in translating 4 times the Quran, revising it, and working on it. So, on one side, he was absolutely making his job, trying to, to demonstrate the superiority of Christian faith. But on the other side, you have always to consider that the polemical attitude was the only way to have your books published, because the censorship of the church did not permit absolutely to make a product very different. In Northern Europe, you have less polemical attitudes and less polemical visions. But on the other side, Marachi was so polemical, but also he dedicated really 15,000 pages of manuscripts in working on the Quran, commenting it, revising the translation, where you can really see that there is much more. There is really a great interest in having a very good translation and then to display the use of it in polemical attitudes. It can be considered absolutely the final result of Middle Ages and Modern Age with no clear mistakes, very good choice, and a very long reflection. And absolutely, in Naples, you have a PhD program every year, and also in Asia, African and Middle Eastern studies, where we have also foreign applicants, and it will be a great occasion to have a possibility. The call is appearing every year in July, usually, because there is a national call, and all the PhD students have to go through the call and exams. You cannot write a professor and to be accepted for a PhD. Our system is different. But it would be very nice. We had also students from Iran, from some Arab countries, and to have a possibility to some further collaboration would be great. Would be great.
All right. Thank you, Professor. So this answer wraps up our discussion section. Would you like to deliver some concluding remarks, or should we close directly, Professor?
No, I would like to thank you for your attention. It is always a pleasure. Actually, I hope in the next 2 years to have a possibility to come to Indonesia. And since you are very good and great scholars with different lines of research, I can tell you that I'm working actually now with the Biennale of Arts in Jeddah on a new project on trying to submit it to European Council and so on, about the Quran in contemporary Muslim societies, the interaction between the printed version of the Quran, the oral tradition of recitation, performativity, and so on. And I really hope in this line of research to have a possibility to interact also with Indonesian scholars. I know some studies, and I thank you very much for your attention. And I'm ready also for interaction also through email. If you have some suggestions, if you have some questions, if you want to share some materials, it will be a pleasure.
All right. Thank you again to our distinguished speaker, Professor Roberto Tottoli, for your valuable insights, and to all participants for your active presence and engagement throughout this session. We truly hope that today's discussion has not only enriched our understanding of the Quran's global intellectual history and journey, but also encouraged us to reflect more deeply on how knowledge travels across cultures, traditions, and historical contexts. We look forward to seeing you again, Professor, in upcoming academic forums and discussion. And billahi taufiq wal hidayah. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. And the floor I give back to the MC, please.
Thank you very much for Professor Roberto Tottoli for incredible explanation and insight. Also, thanks to Hamdi Putra Ahmad SAG MPhil as our host today. Before we officially close today's session, we kindly invite all speakers, hosts, and participants to turn on their camera for a brief group photo. This will only take a moment and will be part of our documentation today. Please turn on your camera. Okay. Because there are 4 slides, I will count the first slide. 3, 2, 1. The second slide. 3, 2, 1. The third slide. 3, 2, 1. And the last. 3, 2, 1. Okay, thank you so much. Ladies and gentlemen, as our agenda ran well without any obstacle, we extend our deepest appreciation to all incredible speakers and participants, especially Professor Dr. Lukman S. Tahir, MAG, for the welcoming speech, Professor Roberto Tottoli for the lecture, Hamdi Putra Ahmad, SAG MPhil, for the host. Extend to our deepest appreciation to the institution and the community of Islamic and Quranic studies for their valuable collaboration, particularly Islamic State University, Dato Karoma Palu, and all academic staff. And please accept my sincere apologies for any mistakes or shortcomings during my role as Master of Ceremony. Let's close our agenda today by reciting Hamdalah. Alhamdulillahirabbil alamin. Thank you very much. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Thank you, Prof.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Professor. See you again.
Nice.
Professor Tottoli,
Yes.
I want to take this time to thank you because
But
like
where
in
are
this,
you now? Where are you?
I'm in Jerusalem now.
Ah,
Greetings from Jerusalem.
how is it?
It was so intense, like
Yeah.
in the past month, but now we're good. Thanks to the ceasefire. But I want to take this opportunity to thank you, because in this community we also read one of your books. I think it's Eastern Christian Engagements with the Quran. We learned Syriac from that book. One of
Ah.
the contributions in that. So, like the thanks goes to you.
When you go back to Yogyakarta, you finish there 1 year more or
Yeah, 1 more year. Yeah. But I got the extension and also like the postdoc offer, so I'm not sure still.
okay.
Probably I will go to Naples also.
Yes, we can organize to have you here to talk about interlinear translation. Let us think. I'm finishing my term as rector in October, and I'm organizing this new project. And I actually for 1 year I have founding here. So keep in contact and write me because we can organize very easily to cover you to come here to give a lecture.
Oh, I will. I will
In
keep in
1 year,
contact with
yes,
you.
maybe the next during between January and June next year will be perfect if you are still in Jerusalem.
I'm still in Jerusalem in that
Okay,
period.
so
Yeah.
we can organize. I was supposed to come in this November to Jerusalem as an evaluator of humanities departments, but then it was cancelled probably for the situation.
Okay. I hope it is only postponed, but not cancelled. But
And I
I
don't
will
know.
get back to you.
Okay.
Yeah,
Keep in contact. Okay.
inshallah. It's great to see you again.
Great to see you. Bye bye.
Bye. Assalamu alaikum.